latest shockers in the case against Casey Anthony. More crucial depositions today as we gear up for the murder trial of the 23-year-old mom. Her attorney, Jose Baez, grilled 3 potentially damaging witnesses. Former Anthony family private investigator Jim Hoover could be the most treacherous witness of all. Hoover claims he originally got involved to help the Anthonys.
I've been a bodyguard previously, I just thought these people need some help. I'm going to go there and offer my help as a citizen.
But is Hoover just a turncoat opportunist now spreading ugly rumors about the Anthony family? Here is Hoover, who seems to like to gossip, claiming he saw signs of an intimate relationship between Cindy Anthony and another private eye, Dominic Casey.
This Anthony was sitting the other, and they were like holding hands and just, doing this kind of thing. And she's talking about he's her rock, one for him. She won't be able to get through this.
What was George doing there holding hands? My God.
Like I said, it was uncomfortable. And then, of course,
Who started rubbing whose arm?
It kind of starts out, you're holding hands, just kind of patting the hand, just kind of like doing this kind of thing. But,
when you saw that, what did you think? I'm thinking, wouldn't you be doing that with my wife?
Really? With friends like these, who needs enemies? Just how is Jose Baez going to punch holes in Hoover's accusations? Meantime, Casey Anthony's former friend, Kia Marie Cruz, who was deposed yesterday by Baez, has been spilling lots of Casey Anthony's dirty laundry. Listen to what she told the National Enquirer before her deposition.
I stopped hanging around with her probably when she started drinking and doing stuff that I would never do in my entire life. She was also smoking weed at one point.
So, along with liar and thief, add drug user to the potentially devastating allegations Casey's defense team will have to deal with. But will the fact that Kia Marie sold her story to the National Enquirer take the wind out of her sails? So many issues, and we're taking your calls. Give me a holler. 1-877-JVM says. That's 1-877-586-7297. First, my fantastic expert panel, Debbie Maggots, psychologist. Darren Kavanoki, criminal defense attorney, also known as the voice of reason. Robert Castelli, professor and former investigator with the New York State Police. Stacey Honowitz, Florida prosecutor. And joining us by phone, the one and only Rosie Franco, a reporter for WFLA in Florida. Rosie, what is the very latest? Hey, Rosie.
Jane, today, Casey Anthony's defense turned their attention to 3 Orange County corrections officers and also private investigator Jim Hoover. Now, he was focusing on the jail sergeant Billy Richardson and grilling him for close to 3 hours today. Richardson was the individual who took Casey to the jail nursing station whenever she learned that Kaylee's remains were discovered back in December. Now, sources say the video cameras from the nurse's TV recorded her doubling over and hyperventilating. Also spoke to today was Corrections Lieutenant Tammy Unser, who was responsible for telling investigators about a conversation she heard between Casey and her attorney Baez, and Corrections Officer Marlene Baker, who handled the letter that Casey wrote to former Orange County Sheriff Kevin Berry in request to speak to her father, George Anthony. Now, defense is accusing the jail officers of serious violations, including violating the attorney-client privilege. The defense says Casey's right to privacy was absolutely violated. And lastly, we know Baez deposed private investigator Jim Hoover. Hoover says the other private investigator he was working with, Dominic Casey, had inside information where Kaylee's body was found.
All right, so much to cover. Let's start with Stacey Honowitz, Florida prosecutor, about this meltdown. I mean, obviously, prosecutors would love to use this video of her doubling over and melting down, hyperventilating, and asking for medication on the day the remains were discovered while she was sitting there in front of a TV set watching the breaking news, but long before those remains were identified as being her daughter, as conscious of guilt. Can they do it? And what questions should Baez ask today, or did he ask today, do you think, to try to punch holes in that plan?
Well, Jane, something very interesting that people have to remember. Sometimes what appears to be great evidence for the prosecution has to be handled with kid gloves, because you have to understand something. This type of evidence can cut both ways. The prosecutor, as a prosecutor would say, this is consciousness of guilt. Look at her reaction. Look what's going on. The defense is going to get up on the other side and say, this is a mother who now is grieving because possibly it is the remains of her daughter.
Yeah, but can I jump in?
So you have to be very
There were
careful.
other times where we thought we had found remains, and there were other breaking news days, and those turned out to not be true and accurate. And she didn't seem to have the same reaction. I think the prosecution is going to say, look, this particular time, when it turned out to be Kaylee's remains later, she has this reaction because she knows that she buried the child there.
That's exactly what the prosecution, you make a very great argument for the prosecution, and certainly they might try to do that. But sometimes, Jane, you have to remember something. In this case, there is overwhelming circumstantial evidence. Does the prosecution really need this piece of evidence to prove beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt that she killed her child?
Well,
that is a strategy that they're going to have to sit and wonder before they try to admit this evidence.
Well, Darren
it could be
Kavanaugh,
crucial, but it could go the other way.
I also want to ask you about all this circumstantial evidence because we have pored over it for so many months now. Have we robbed it of its shock effect? In other words, everybody feels like they've already gone through the trial, so when prosecutors actually present all this evidence at trial, is it going to be a big yawn?
Well, that is
Yes.
one of the dangers. And of course, when we're talking about circumstantial evidence, we must remember that there are special rules that generally apply to it. So before we can draw any inference from evidence, the thing that from which we draw the inference must be proved beyond the shadow of a doubt. But let's not forget, and your question really goes to this, are people going to have issue fatigue? Are they going to be bored of this stuff because it's all come out already? And trials really are a theatrical experience orchestrated by the attorneys that are putting it on. It's a real danger for prosecutors here.
Also deposed today by Baez, Private Eye Jim Hoover. He's the one who made that controversial videotape of another Anthony family private eye, Dominic Casey, searching the woods where Kaylee's remains were later found about a month later. Hoover says he volunteered to help the Anthonys out of the goodness of his heart because they were being attacked in their own home, and he saw it on TV, and he got in his car and drove over to help him. But in this previous depo, he was already starting to churn up rumors. Listen.
George ever tell you that he thought that he and Cindy were probably going to be divorced when this thing was over?
He didn't use the term divorce. I think the term he used was wouldn't be together.
All right, Debbie Maggis, what do you make of this guy who was deposed by Baez, churning up all this gossip and insinuating himself into this case? Does he also sort of rob himself of any credibility because he seems to be nosy?
Yeah, clearly this guy is an opportunistic guy, and he is robbing himself of all credibility because once you start getting in the middle of gossip and starting to sell your story all over the place, who can really listen to you anymore? I think the defense can really dig holes into this guy for sure.
Well, Bob Castelli, you're the former investigator. It seems like every single witness for the prosecution has some big problem that could make them toxic, essentially.
Absolutely. I mean, this becomes soap opera rather than, a great murder case here. But, the important thing to remember is, for the defense's part, all they've got to do is make sure that there is some form of reasonable doubt established here. And while this has become a circus in many ways, the fact is a lot of the stuff here that is circumstantial, and I might add, having investigated cases like this, I'd rather have a good circumstantial case sometimes than a highly technical case. The prosecution may have a very good case here, but the circus atmosphere of this is continuing to put the potential for the reasonable doubt in a lot of people's mind here.
Stacey Hodowitz.
The circus won't be taking place in court. In other words, all these things that we discuss, that we hear about, these witnesses, these depositions, doesn't mean that any of this evidence is coming into the actual courtroom. And you better hope that these jurors that are picked have not been listening to this stuff, because that's exactly what
good
the
luck
problem
with that,
has been.
Stacey. Okay, more on these explosive depositions in just a moment. Who do you think will be the key prosecution witness, the star witness against Casey Anthony?